Hello everyone, my name is Yalun. Together with my teammates Amira, Jain, Lucas, and Perlie, we are Group 5. Our presentation today will be on the question, is inequality too high in Singapore? Our presentation will be split into 7 parts. We'll begin with the introduction, followed by cause of inequality. The third part will be government strategies to reduce inequality. Our fourth part will be Gini coefficient, followed by comparison of Singapore with Denmark. And the sixth part will be limitation, and we will end off with a conclusion. With COVID-19 shedding light on the growing disparity between the rich and the poor, there is rising discontent among low-income households as income inequality is too high in Singapore. The government has been implementing measures to help reduce the burden for lower-income households. Despite their efforts, the measures taken seem to be insufficient. Within 10 years, between 2009 to 2019, the bottom 10% income of Singapore increased by only 240, while the top 10% income of Singapore increased by 4,792. This indicates the widening income gap between the rich and the poor. As Singapore becomes more and more affluent since its independence, income inequality has been rising consistently. There are many causes for Singapore's income inequality, but I will go in depth on 3 causes that my team feel are the most important. First, wage segregation entrenched in Singapore. Second, Singapore's policy of meritocracy. And third, regressive tax. As Singapore transits from a manufacturing-based economy to a knowledge-based economy, the demand for the type of labor shifted dramatically. High-skilled workers enjoy faster income growth because they can exploit more business and career opportunities. Meanwhile, jobs are less readily available for the unskilled laborers who struggle to climb the social ladder and are left behind, thus causing the income divide to widen. Next, Singapore adopts a policy of meritocracy, whereby people are rewarded based on their capabilities and their hard work. This affected the dynamics of Singapore's society and resulted in an overemphasis on academic achievements, causing education to become a dividing factor in income levels. Those who excel academically are likely to get higher paying jobs, while those who are less academically inclined tend to end up in low-skill industry and earn minimal income. From the figure, we can see that people with tertiary education occupy a significantly larger proportion of Singapore's income than the rest. Although this figure is based on data in 2001, the trend still exists today, with an even greater difference in proportion of income. Moving on, a regressive tax is a tax imposed in such a manner that the tax rate decreases as the income increases. Singapore's Goods and Service Tax, also commonly known as the GST, is an example of regressive tax. All consumers will have to pay the same amount of 7% GST on goods and services purchased from GST-registered businesses, regardless of their income levels. This results in a greater burden on lower-income households because GST takes up a more substantial portion of their total income as compared to higher-income households. Furthermore, GST is projected to increase from 7% to 9%, hence inequality will likely to worsen.
Let's take a look at some of the government's approaches to reduce inequality and whether they work. Firstly, we have the progressive tax system for personal income. Singapore has relatively low personal income tax rates compared to other countries. Looking at the rates by IRAS, the bottom 10% of income earners need not pay anything for their first $20,000. Also, only 2% of the next $10,000 will be taxed. These rates allow the lower income groups to afford more of their income for consumption and savings. Let's then take a look at the top 10% of income earners. The top 10% has to pay $44,550 for the first $320,000, and any excess will be taxed 22%. This means the richer groups have to pay more taxes based on their income. This does not take into account any exceptions such as donations or Secondly, the government provides many types of schemes and subsidies to help both the lower and middle income groups, such as welfare distribution, progressive wage model, and education schemes and subsidies. The government helps families to reduce the financial burden on education fees. Primary and secondary school students are given up to $11,000 in subsidies annually. Additional financial assistance and schemes for both government and independent schools provide extra relief to eligible groups. For tertiary and pre-university students, student loans, financial assistance such as bursaries and subsidies are available. Such schemes and subsidies allow most children to afford education, including children from lower income groups who have been proven to show higher returns to society. Next, Singapore adopts the progressive wage model, a hybrid model with mandated salary floors currently implemented in 3 sectors: cleaning, security, and landscape. The PWM allows lower wage workers to improve on their skills so as to enhance productivity and take on higher salaries in the future. So, do you agree that PWM works, or do you believe that minimum wage is a better approach? Well, the answer isn't that simple. So far, we see that PWM in the 3 sectors have worked. According to Minister of Manpower Mrs. Josephine Teo, the last 5 years have seen a 30% increase in wage in the PWM sectors compared to the 21% wage of median workers. Due to Singapore's heavy reliance on foreign workers, minimum wage makes it hard to be implemented. If minimum wage is set too high, it will deter employers from employing, leading to high levels of unemployment. This can be seen in the graph of a price floor. We see that with higher minimum wage, more supply of workers are available, but the demand by employers will decrease because these employers may not want to afford giving such salaries. Unlike PWM, minimum wage has no ladder, and this means the salary will never increase, lacking the incentive for workers to upskill. Singapore heavily emphasizes on meritocracy, thus the PWM shows that people start out with a minimum salary, and with better skills they will be rewarded with higher pay. An example would be the cleaning sector, where the government has guaranteed a pay rise for different positions, incentivizing people to work harder. Weighing both the pros and cons of minimum wage and PWM, the PWM would be the better choice for reducing the inequality gap, although more can be done. A good wage model essentially lasts throughout all economic cycles such as recessions and normal periods. The government has also planned to gradually expand PWM to other sectors, and by 2022, the PWM is set to be implemented in the maintenance and waste management sectors. Next, Singapore redistributes its wealth through the Workfare Income Supplement Scheme, tax rebates and vouchers. Tax rebates and reliefs are provided for taxpayers, which are usually the middle income earners. Examples would be the CPF relief when no tax is imposed for CPF contributions to encourage people to save for their retirement. The earned income relief is also available depending on age and taxable income. Workers living with parents earning less than $4,000 annually or are unemployed are given $9,000 per parent. Vouchers are also given to lower income groups to help with groceries and GST. Those living in smaller HDBs are usually given extra. The workfare schemes are usually given through cash payments and CPF contributions to help the lower and middle income groups to save, and to also help those affected during crises like the pandemic.
Thanks, Amira, for sharing. But the question now is, if Singapore and its government are really doing enough to close the income gap among Singaporeans, since income inequality continues to exist. To determine the amount of income inequality in Singapore, we must first look at the Gini coefficient. This is used to represent the income inequality or wealth inequality within a nation or any other group of people. The coefficient measures the inequality among the values of 0 to 1. A Gini coefficient of 0 expresses perfect equality where everyone has the same income. A Gini coefficient of 1 expresses maximum inequality among the values where only one person has all the income or consumption and all others have none. To represent the Gini coefficient, we have to use the Lorenz curve. The closer the Lorenz curve is to the line of perfect equality, the less income inequality there is. On the other hand, the further the Lorenz curve is from the line of perfect equality, the higher or greater income inequality. In the context of Singapore, within the past 10 years, Gini coefficient has actually decreased from 0.432 in 2012 to 0.398 in 2019. This shows a closing gap in terms of income inequality. There are, however, limitations of using the Gini coefficient, since the Gini coefficient measures the proportion or percentage of wage increase compared to actual dollars amount. So in this case, let's look at two people, person A and person B, where person A makes $10,000 and person B makes $100,000 a year. For a period of 10 years, let's say their salary grew by 3% per annum. But over time, the gap between their wage grew at an accelerated rate. After 10 years, person A's salary grew by $3,000, but person B's salary grew by $30,000. As you can see, that is a huge difference in terms of absolute income, which has an effect on their purchasing power. But according to the Gini coefficient, there is no change to income inequality as their rate of growth is the same. And this is how Singapore's Gini coefficient can be stable, even though absolute inequality is getting worse.
Thank you, Lucas. I will now be going through the comparison of Singapore with Denmark. Singapore's inequality levels are too high when compared to other countries, in particular Denmark. Social spending and progressive taxation are key determining factors to reduce and keep inequality low, and Singapore's measures in this regard pale in comparison to Denmark. As a welfare state, Denmark spends more than 25% of their GDP on social spending, while Singapore only spends 8.2% of its GDP. Denmark's citizens are also taxed up to 56% of their income, as compared to Singaporeans' maximum income tax of 22%. However, in return, Denmark provides an abundant amount of welfare benefits to its citizens, such as free healthcare and education, which further reduces the burden for lower-income households. In 2018, Denmark's Gini coefficient of 0.256 is lower as compared to Singapore's at 0.458, showing that Denmark's income distribution is more evenly distributed than Singapore's. According to the Pearson Economics textbook, countries with higher levels of GDP per capita report higher levels of life satisfaction. However, Denmark has a lower GDP per capita as compared to Singapore, yet their citizens are a lot happier than ours, ranking second in the World Happiness Report. This is because Denmark's government redistributes more income, giving out more transfer payments to their citizens, hence providing them with a higher quality of life. Contrarily, Singapore has kept taxes low and focused more on supporting the lower income groups rather than providing lots of support to all income groups equally. Singapore's high inequality levels are further evidenced by its ranking of 149 out of 157 countries in the Oxfam's Commitment to Reducing Inequality Index, while Denmark topped the list for having the lowest inequality levels. Given that fiscal policies are crucial factors in keeping income inequality low and making their citizens satisfied with their standard of living, Singapore's measures pales in comparison to Denmark's policies. As Singapore's inequality levels remain high, more can still be done to steer the country towards greater equality.
Thank you, Jain, for sharing. However, we must be aware of the limitations in the way inequality is measured. Firstly, we have the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient does not take into account structural changes in the population, where such changes can significantly influence the economic inequality. Another limitation will be that the Gini coefficient does not capture interventions done by the government to decrease the inequality gap. Next, we have the data gathered. Indicators such as GDP per capita does not take into account the income distribution. Although the GDP per capita of a country may be very high, it might be due to a small percentage of the population earning relatively higher incomes than the majority. Secondly, some data used might be outdated, but we believe that such trends still exist since the system of meritocracy has not been abandoned and income inequality continues to grow. Despite government efforts to reduce the inequality gap in Singapore, there is still an increasing disparity between the rich and poor. This is due to the effects of wage segregation, the meritocracy policy, and the regressive tax. Hence, there is still room for improvement for the way Singapore's government tackled inequality. Perhaps we could learn more from Denmark and make structural changes in order to achieve a more equal and happier Singapore. Thank you for listening.